Welcome to Springvale Seventh-day Adventist Church online here in Melbourne, Australia. I am Pastor Victor Acuna and I am so happy to be here with you praising the name of our Lord Jesus Christ on another beautiful Sabbath day. We are blessed to have another wonderful speaker today. Thank you.
Good morning, Springvale. Last time I was with you, I can just remember, it seems like ages ago, I talked to you through the parable of the prodigal son through Middle Eastern eyes. And I think I promised you at that stage, I'm trying not to renege on a promise, that I would talk to you next time about the next parable, which is probably the most difficult parable that Jesus ever taught. Actually, it's the fourth parable of the set that Jesus was told to the people who were criticizing him for mixing with sinners. You know the ones of the sheep that got lost, the coin that was lost, and the boy that was lost. Well, this one actually follows afterwards, but the monks, in their wisdom in the 4th century, decided to put put the next parable in the next chapter. But it shouldn't be in the next chapter. It's a parable and it doesn't even have the heading of parable. And if they had done that, it would have helped in the interpretation of the parable. Because this, as I said, is the most difficult parable for Western interpreters of all of them. It's a disturbing story. It's the parable of the unjust steward. Preachers and writers and teachers and commentators have been struggling with it for centuries and getting it wrong mostly. And I'm going to help you get it right today. We're going to go straight down the middle, no complicated fanciful interpretations that try to get around the difficult part, which is you've got a steward, an estate manager, who is cheating on his master, his employer, and then when he gets caught out, he lies and he cheats more, and then at the end Jesus commends him. This is the problem that has been disturbing people for millennia. The thing is, if today we're going to look at it through the eyes of peasants, for the peasants of Jesus' day, but peasant thinking generally, I'm going to bring you interpretation from the Middle East, and particularly from Egypt, where I was for 5 years. But if any of you have experience with village culture, with peasant culture anywhere, this will make sense to you as well, because it needs to be seen through the eyes of survival peasant people in order for it to be unravelled. Now, in my what I'm going to tell you today is dependent on the very good work of Kenneth Bailey, who's probably the best Western interpreter of the Middle Eastern aspects of the Bible. He lived there for 60 years, in 3 books that he's written, as well as my 5 years working with peasants. Most of the students at Nile Union Academy, where I was, were the children of peasants for 5 years, so I've confirmed it so I can speak confidently today about this parable. The subject of the parable is God, sin, and salvation. It's not about money. It's not about mammon. It's not about God and mammon. That's one of the things that confuses us with this parable, is it runs directly onto another story about money and steward, it looks like. That is a poem, and that poem is quite separate from this series of 4 parables. So we're not talking about money today. We're not talking about bankers. We're not talking about borrowing. We're talking about farmers. Now, in Jesus' parables, there's usually usually three characters. Usually only two human characters, individual characters, and then there's also the community. He always has the community in mind. The community is one of the players in his story. Now, an exception is the prodigal son, where you have four, you have the two brothers, but usually it's two. Two people, and a community is definitely involved. So let's look at the parable. I'm going to read it to you. I'm reading it to you from the New Revised Standard Version, because that's the best version for cultural input, even though they get it wrong sometimes as well. There was a rich man who had a steward, and charges were brought to him that he was wasting goods. You see the three players there? There was a rich man who had a steward, and charges were brought to him by who? By the community. So there are three different players in this story. And the charges were that he was wasting his goods. It doesn't explain how he was wasting the goods. Maybe we'll talk about that later, but it's not important for the story. And he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Turn in the account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward." And the steward said to himself, "What shall I do? Because my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses." So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, "How much do you owe?" And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. Then the master commended the dishonest steward for his prudence. For the sons of this age are wiser in their own generation than the sons of life. You can see why this has been a parable for people. What a cheat he was. What a cheat he was. Now, if we're seriously studying a parable, we look also at the rhetoric or the literary form of it, because that helps us to understand it. This parable is in the usual 7-step parable. There's 7 parts of it. You've got the introduction to the players at the beginning. You've got the solution at the end, and then there are two ways that the steward loses. There's 2 ways the community gains, and right bang in the middle is the man talking to himself, coming up with his solution for his future. And that is the center of the story. The center of 7 is always the solution, whereas when we are telling stories, we save the conclusion till the end. We build up, and then there's a conclusion at the end. With all of this form of literature, the conclusion's in the middle. That helps us to start off with. Okay, it's really embedded deeply in Middle Eastern or village culture. And we've got to look through those eyes, even though it's against our values at times, to come up with what Jesus was actually saying. Now, what was happening was there was an estate. All of the Middle Eastern versions of the Bible and commentators from way back 1,000 years ago called him an estate manager. And so it's important to think of him as that. His job was to keep track of the agreements that were made between the tenant farmers and the owner of the property. Now, what would happen is the owner of the property had a big area of agricultural land, and people could come and take a part of it and do something with it. In this case, it's oil, planting olives, and the other one is wheat. He's planting wheat, and the agreement is that when the harvest comes, there's a certain amount, usually a certain amount of the produce goes to the owner of the property. Not a percentage, but a certain amount. So in drought years, it was really hard on the people, but it was never hard on the owner because he always got the same amount. And so the estate manager, his job was to keep track of all of this stuff and collect the produce when it was harvested. It said he was wasting the produce that he should have been collecting, probably. And I said, it's not important. Probably he was taking the right amount from the people, otherwise they would protest, and then he would be taking some of it off before he put it into the storage of the master. So what happens next is the master says, he said, what is this? A better translation is, what is this I have been hearing about you? And leaves it hanging there. This is so typical for an accusation in the Middle East. They don't tell you what you have done wrong, don't accuse you of what you've done wrong. It's a bit like when I went into the news agents yesterday. I'd gone in and was going to buy something, but the amount I was going to buy was not big enough to use my MasterCard. So I said, wait a minute, I'll just go and get it. There's the ATM next door. I rushed next door, got the money, came back in. As I came back in, a lady said to me, don't forget to check in. And obviously I checked in 10 minutes before. So when I was finished, I went to her and I said, look, it's really good to begin a conversation, particularly with a stranger, with a question rather than an answer. If you said to me, have you checked in, I could explain to you, but you just said, you accused me of not checking in. But this is the way, this is very typical, is he just said, what is this I have been hearing about you? And left it hanging for him to think, I've been caught at last, what shall I admit to, what shall I not admit to? And the rich man is just waiting for him to come out with what he'd been doing wrong, to accuse himself, in other words. But he has already hinted that there are more than one people and people that have reported him, and he has been hearing for a long time, so it's not a new thing. So this is really putting the pressure on him, a kind of an accusation. It's like a parent saying to the children, what have you been doing wrong? You've had that sort of question. What an agony it is, that sort of question. Now this is one of the most surprising things about this parable, about this story, is that he keeps silence. He doesn't give an answer. This is Kenneth Bailey taught all over the Middle East, and he talked about this story with people from everywhere, from Syria to Egypt, everywhere, and all of them were astounded that the man said nothing. This is just so atypical, because immediately a person is accused, they will start to come up with excuses. They will ways to reduce the damage. Like they won't say, I've been working on I've been an estate manager with you all my life, and my father and my grandfather before me. Surely our long-term relationship as estate managers is not going to come between us on the basis of just a bit of a discrepancy in the accounting somewhere. Or else he'll say, and this is something that we say quite often. They said, "Who said I had been wasting your rental? Who said it? Bring them here and let them say it in front of my face, and let's see what the liars have to support what they're saying." He doesn't say that. There are a dozen other things he could have said as well. And in the Middle East, the last thing was he would get important people, just as important as the rich man, to come and negotiate for him rather than he himself. I've seen that happen dozens of times. But he doesn't do it. He doesn't do any of those things. Usually an accusation like that will take weeks, if not months, of negotiation before he will lose his job. But in this story, it's just shocking, is that the rich man says, "What is this I've been hearing about you?" And then he says, "You have been wasting my goods. You bring the accounts, you're fired," and fires him on the spot. This, in the thinking of the Middle East and the peasant people, is just a disturbing part of the story, something that didn't bother us too much, but the disturbing part of the story. Fired him on the spot. Now, there's no real explanation for why the story would have been told this shocking way, this uncharacteristic way, except that there probably is a theological teaching here, in that if the story is about God and man, then we have no way to excuse ourselves. When we come to judgment, we won't be able to excuse ourselves. We won't be able to get people to negotiate for us, because God knows everything, and therefore it's useless to try to defend ourselves. It's probably that. But even so, all of our days since Adam, we always come up with excuses and who said what and why they said it, and how she pushed me into it and he made me do it. We come up with excuses, but in this story there is nothing, just suddenly fired, which tells you something about the rich man as well. The rich man knows his business, and that's very typical of the people in the Middle East. The owner of business knows every detail. He's not aloof, he's not separate, but he does have someone running around doing the accounting for him, but he knows every detail. And this rich man does not tolerate people cheating. He brings them to account. There are consequences. You can't sin and get away with it. God will bring you to face up to what you are. These are probably the deep reasons why the rich man acted as he did. Tried to give him a chance to explain, to confess, to repent, and then there could have been a better solution, but he didn't. He kept silent, which means he did not own up to it. He did not deal with it. He did not admit it. He was a typical sinner. He was resistant to repentance. So he's fired on the spot. What he has to go and get are the accounts. And he's sent home to get the accounts. And he's really in a pickle now. And he has two things that he's going to lose. He's lost his job. And maybe a job that he's had that, as we said, maybe a third generation, fourth generation job. He's lost his job. But he's also lost his future. Because in a face-to-face society, everyone will soon know that he was fired because he was dishonest, and that's it. There's no other job that he could get anywhere, and he can't even live in the area anymore. So he's really in a tight corner. And we have this centre part of the story, the fourth part of a seven step, is he's talking to himself. And he said, I'm not strong enough to do farming. Now, he's obviously an older person, but he's also not a person who's hardened and worked hard all his life. The fact that he's even thinking about becoming a labourer on someone's part of the property is commendable. He's not shirking the possibility, but he said, I'm not strong enough. I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't last. He said, the only other alternative available is for me to go begging. But I'm not going to be good at begging because I don't have any of the qualifications for being a beggar. I'm not lame, I'm not blind, I'm not disabled. And if people knew me as the manager last week and I'm going to sit and beg this week, no one's going to give me anything. I've got no way out. What am I going to do? And as he thinks, he suddenly comes up with a conclusion. Comes up with two elements in the conclusion. The first one is he notices how compassionate the rich man was when he fired him. Normally, the firing would become public immediately, would be public humiliation. But this rich man did not called him and told him privately, and has not announced it, and nobody knows about it, and he didn't take him to court and get everything that he had to get him to pay back, and that's what he should have done, that's what he could have done. But he said nothing about recompense, he said nothing about paying back, he just said you're fired, and it seemed like a very private thing, and therefore a very kind thing. So he thought, okay, my master's kind, maybe too kind. How can I play on this one? And the second thing he would have thought to himself, he said, I'm not the only cheat and thief in this village. Everybody else is trying to steal something as well. So I reckon we can play on that as well. So I'm going to play on the goodness of the master and the deviousness of the fellow villagers, and I coming up with a plan, and he came up with a plan. And his very clever plan was to reduce the amount of debt that the people in that community had towards the rich man. And he thought, the rich man is so kind, he's not going to expose me when I do this. Very clever. So he sends servants to call in the debtors to come and see him one by one. And he sends them immediately. He knows the master's waiting for the books. He has probably an hour or two, is all he has to set up this system that will ensure his future. And so he gets servants to run out and bring them in. And then they sit down in front of him one by one. He doesn't dare have them as a group because they may twig to it, but they will come because he's called them, and they know that whatever he has to say to them has to be something in the name of the master, because estate agents never made decisions by themselves. They never had the right to make decisions by themselves. Whatever was going to happen was going to be because the master has got something to tell him, and they come in and sit down in front of him, and he says to them, how much do you owe? Now he knows how much they owe. He's got the account book in front of him. But in a non-literate society, the people keep the amount in their head, and he keeps the amount in the book. And he doesn't want to have an argument about this, doesn't want to have a discussion about it. He wants them to tell him. So the first one says, it's 100 barrels of oil I will be owing him at harvest. And it's the same as on his record, so he can go ahead now. So that's good. He said, okay, quickly sit down and change it from 100 to 50? He said, change it immediately, quickly. Now, when he says quickly, they twig to what's going on. They know that this is not legitimate, this is not normal, this is not the the rich man, giving them a big discount. But they have deniability. I didn't know that he was cheating. I didn't know that he was doing something that was illegal. Actually, it was illegal because from the moment he was fired, he was no longer able to make any kind of agreement with anybody. He didn't even have the right to call them. He was fired. He was finished. He didn't have a job anymore. He didn't have any part anymore. And they began to twig that, and this is the commentary as by the commentators of 1,000 years ago in the Middle East, who came up with this solution, and it fits very well into Middle Eastern peasant society. They twigged because in peasant society, face-to-face society, there are two things. One is personal awareness, and the other one is public proprietary. Whatever is public, you have to deal with it. If you break that, you have broken the rule. But if you think it's wrong, but it hasn't been said that it's wrong, you can sneak in between, and you can survive. Because peasant society is survival society. They have many tricks and schemes to be able to survive without being caught out. And this was one of them. They become aware that it's a cheat, and they become complicit in it because he makes them to write and change. So he can say, I didn't do it, I didn't change it, I knew I wasn't any more a legal person who can make any changes on the document. They made it themselves. And as soon as they did that, they could never dob him in. They could never dob him in because they had become complicit in it privately. So he does that with the second one as well. Then at that point, the people go back to the village, and nothing is secret. Everyone knows. Everyone will want to know, why were you called? Why did the bailiff? Why did the estate agent talk to you? What? And and they told the good news. The good news is the master has reduced our debt, our fee, our rental by 50%. Isn't he a wonderful master? The whole of the village gets excited now because all of them have 1/2 the value of that oil is about 1.5 years of labour wages. It's huge, and it's not just a one-off. It's agreement now between the landlord and the tenant to cut it in half for the next, until the landlord can find a way to raise the rent, which is going to be a huge benefit. So they begin to have a party. Everyone is praising the master for his generosity, thinking that it probably is not legitimate, but that's private awareness, is not public knowledge, so they are okay. And then the estate manager takes the books back quickly, within an hour, within 2 hours maximum, and gives it to the master. The master opens the books up, and he sees all the changes. He sees crossed out half, and he immediately knows what the steward has done. At this point, he has two choices. He can make real trouble for the steward, and he can go to the law court. There were courts, village courts, town courts. He could go to the village and say to the people, stop rejoicing because this is cheating. The steward has cheated me. I didn't say you could reduce it by half. It's back to where it was, and everybody loses their enthusiasm and begins to grumble and begins to say how hard the man is, and the good relationship between the landlord and all of the peasants that are using his property suddenly becomes destroyed. Or he can just swallow it, just take it and say nothing about it. He sees that he's caught, he's trapped. And because he's a good landlord, a good person, and because he doesn't have a vengeful thing against the steward that he needs to wring him dry in public, he he decides to keep quiet. And at that point he says, clever, clever, clever steward. How clever. Because he could see that none of the people who got their rents reduced would ever rat on him. And so now, and they'd all be grateful to him. And where it says, he says, what can I do so that they will invite me into their houses? The proper translation is, so I can get a job to be their manager. So now he has a chance of getting management because he is so clever and he's been so helpful that I'd rather have him on my side than against my side. And so he can continue his job as being a clever hero. And this is one of the main points about peasant culture, is that they have this Robin Hood hero mentality. Tom and Jerry. The cat is always chasing the mouse. The mouse is always cleverer than the cat. Robin Hood steals from the rich and gives to the poor. He's a hero. And in this case, the man would have been a hero because he had got benefit for the people from the rich man. Well, it is like that. It's like a countercultural hero, except in this story there are a couple of things that don't ring true. One is the big man, the powerful man, the one that the peasants are really against, is a good man. He's never pressed them. He's never made life difficult for them. So it's harder for them to be excited about someone who cheats him than they would if the man had been hard on them, and they would rejoice forever for that. And the second thing is that in the story the master commends the steward, clever man. And that would never happen in a Robin Hood story, that the person that was robbed, that had the tables turned on them, would say, oh, what a clever person, what a good person. So there was something a little bit skew-whiff in the story. And that is where all of the Western interpreters have got it wrong and said Jesus is commending someone who's lying and cheating, and when he's caught, he lies and cheats more to cover it and to cover his own skin. Jesus is not commending. In the end, he says this man is clever in his age, in the worldly thinking, but you have to be clever in heavenly thinking. And what he's saying is that this man banked on the fact that the rich man, the landowner, was compassionate, was merciful, was generous, was a good man. He put that into his plan. He counted on it. That was clever. So Jesus says, why don't you, who know God, be clever enough to throw yourself on the mercy of God? God's mercy is even greater than the landlord. And if you did wrong, if you admitted it and you repented of it, he has mercy to forgive you, reinstate you, help you to keep going forever. But if you hide your sin, if you don't repent, if you don't throw yourself on his mercy instead of trying to have clever schemes to save yourself, then you are going the way of the world, of the children of darkness, not the children of light. So Jesus is not commending the man for his ethics. He's commending him for his cleverness, for his thinking a thing through, for him putting into action what he works out. But he wants us to do it the right way, for the right reason, with God. So that's a pretty powerful story. Now, Jesus does have other unsavory people in his other stories. There are 4 of them, and it's the same principle. If it's like this for them, how much more would it be like this for heaven? For instance, you've got the woman, the widow who asks the judge to help her solve her problem, and he refuses to. She bothers him until the end he says, "I give up," and he rules on her behalf. And Jesus said, if an unjust judge can be made to do the right thing by this woman bothering him over and over again, how much more your Father, who is ready to forgive, will listen to you. How much more? Another story is the story of the man who found treasure in somebody else's field. Very unsavoury character. He's for some reason he's digging around in the field. Maybe he's a labourer or something, and he comes across treasure box in the field, but he doesn't doesn't take the good news to the owner of the field. He saves money, buys the field, then takes the treasure. Very unsavoury character. And Jesus says the same thing. If he will work so hard and so cleverly to get treasure, why don't you work hard to get the treasure that God is offering you? If even the bad people take it seriously, why don't you take it seriously? Because God is there, open, ready to forgive you. So this parable was told as a stimulus for us to throw ourselves on the mercy of God, and that's what I'd like you to think about today and this week and in the coming days. Is there anything that you really need to come clean about with God? Is there anything that you're hiding? You think you're hiding from God. They think you're hiding from people, and you're not going to do anything about it until it's exposed, until suddenly you're caught, you're found out. Is there something like that in your life? Because Jesus is saying, come clean about it, because my mercy is enough for you. My grace is enough for you. I'm ready to forgive you, to reinstate you, to put you back to where you were before, to help you stand up for where you've fallen over. Don't hide it. Don't go on to add sin, to cover sin, and think you're clever and get to a place where you're desperate and you're actually depressed and you're taking it out on other people around you because you just have something you haven't dealt with. If this unjust steward is clever enough to count on the goodness of the master, why don't you, as children of God, be clever enough to ask God to extend mercy for you? Because he will. He's ready to do it. He's there, ready to do it every time. I think that there are other applications I can imagine, but the thing is, I only have one person sitting in front of me, David, and I don't know what his sins are, so I can't really work on him. And I don't know the rest of you, so I can't encourage you, push you, nudge you towards dealing with God and coming clean and asking for his forgiveness. But I wish that you would do it yourselves. There are all kinds of things that we do. Something I was thinking about last night is, and I'm not going to get onto this too much today, but this whole thing about vaccination and also conspiracies. The biggest attraction, and I feel so sad about this, the biggest attraction about conspiracies is that you begin to think that you know what other people don't know, that you are. All the rest of the people are duped. People are trying to dupe you, and also you are duped. And you're the only one who knows. You know, and I hope you don't say you know because you know about Jesus coming soon, or you know about because you've read it in the Bible, or somebody's given, not a religious reason. But the thing is, you've attempted to say, I know what nobody else knows, and therefore I'm special. This is such a tempting thing. I think we ought to just be aware of the sin of clinging to trying to be special. Jesus says, God says this. Excuse me while I find it. God says this: live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. If it's possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Anyway, you can make these applications. You can apply these any which way you like. I don't think that's even a very important one. I think the most important one is what's happening between you and your spouse and your children and your family and your neighbours and your employers and your employees, and maybe even in some cases between you and you, your own secrets. But I wish that you could take the strong, deep message from this parable that says, admit it, throw yourself on the mercy of God, because you can depend on God. His grace is sufficient for you in any of the conditions and any of the situations you find yourself. May God bless you as you ponder Jesus' encouragement to throw ourselves on the mercy of God.
If you would like contact details or information on how to support the ministry of the Springvale Seventh-day Adventist Church, you can find those in the description down below. May God bless you, and may God keep you safe. Amen.